Hello, joining us today is Denison University athletic trainer and professor, Dr. Eric Winters. Dr. Winters, thank you for taking time today to share with us some insight on youth sports.
Thanks so much, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here. So what I'm talking about today is really childhood participation in sporting activities, but particularly whether it's beneficial for children to participate in a great many different types of sporting activities, or perhaps if it's more desirable for a child to specialize early in life in a single sport. And we do that because really ultimately all of us parents, we have the same shared value. We want our children to enjoy their sporting activity, their athletic culture, develop within it so that they can get the maximum benefit, both physically, socially, emotionally, all the benefits that we can agree that athletic activity enables. But the question really is, like I said, single sport, early single sport specialization, or multi-sport specialization. Now, you would think that this is an easy thing to get a grip of, but it's actually hard for the sports medicine community. So I'll take the first one. What does it mean to be early athletic development? Well, with this one, the sports medicine community has a fairly easy time of agreeing on what that means. Really, we're talking about any children who are younger than the age of 13. So if a child is less than 13, 12 and younger, we consider that to be early athletic development, or really also early physical development as well. Then the question is, well, what does it mean to be a sports specialist? And you would think that this would be easy, but this is surprisingly difficult. So we have within the sports medicine community, we have two really questions, categories, that we ask ourselves. The first is the breadth of the child's activity, sporting activity. And the second classification is what's the intensity of that activity. If we can answer both of those questions, we can get a feeling for the degree to which a child is a sports specialist. Okay, so the first question we ask, like I said, is the breadth. If a child is participating in a single sport at the exclusion of their interest in other sports, so for instance, they participate in one sport, but they would like to participate in a couple others, but they're going to limit that activity because they really want to focus their energy just on the one that's their primary focus. Then we say that it's an indication that they're sports specialists. The other one we have to keep in mind is that if they're also limiting their availability for free time play, that's also an indication that a child is a sports specialist. So those two characteristics tell us that. Then we look at the question of intensity. The question of intensity, really we're asking is when they're participating in that sport, are they spending more than 8 months out of the year being intensively coached, intensively trained, and intensively engaging in competition? So if they are, then we can say that we have a strong sports specialist. And if it's under the age of 13, then they're an early sports specialist. So why do we care about this, right? Ultimately, we're asking the question, is there something detrimental, or are there potential detrimental aspects of being an early sports specialist? And we developed that thought because we're looking at children who are early in their physical development. If you look at the skeletal structure of a child is not fully developed. The muscles of a child are not fully developed. And of course, if we look at the tendons and the ligaments, they're also relatively undeveloped. And so if we're placing repetitive forces onto these tissue, then it's likelihood that we fear that there's a chance that they'll develop overuse. That is to say, stress reactions and overuse injuries, inflammatory processes, and different types of overuse injuries. And again, that's because we're dealing with the same repetitive forces that are associated with a single sport. Now, to that, I can say that, the research is still developing, but the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine has concluded that indeed early sports specialists are at greater risk for overuse injuries. Then the question is, while they're at greater risk for overuse injuries, is Is there a benefit for a child to participate in a great range that goes beyond the relative risk of injury? And for that, you have to ask you have to consider the quality of the movement patterns. So in recent years, in sports medicine, we've considered this underlying capacity for movement. We call it the functional movement pyramid. So in other words, a child needs to, at an early stage, develop the fundamental movement patterns that are associated with really all sports before specializing on one particular aspect of a sport becomes really vital. So what are these? Well, we could talk specifically, but I think what we'd really like to know is just simply, it boils down to a child needs to be able to walk, run, kick, throw, catch, these fundamental aspects before we worry about developing those rudimentary skills into the types of skills that we would see within any one single sport. So I think in order to illustrate that, I think that what we should do is I can share with you some research that we performed in the biomechanics lab over at Denison, my research. And what we looked at was really the quality of movement during baseball throwing for children who are really under the age of 13. And what we found was if we take the pitching movement and we look at these really small segments of the pitching motion, we see that these younger children really have inappropriate ability to control and coordinate their body in such a way as to make the throwing motion most efficient and least taxing on their body. In other words, they weren't getting much work from their trunk. Most of the velocity of the pitched ball was coming from the shoulder rather than from the whole body. And of course, if we're loading up any one particular part of an immature body, then we are certainly running the risk of putting too much force over a longer period of time. And so we can expect to see things like inflammatory conditions associated with overuse injuries. And so if I were offering some suggestion, I think that if we're dealing with a young person under the age of 13, I think it's desirable for not only for the child to participate in a wide range of sports so that they learn how to run, throw, catch, kick, jump, those fundamental movement patterns, and really have an opportunity to develop those to a larger degree, and also to provide children with the opportunity for unstructured free play, all of which allows their body to develop the capacity for movement as they're developing physically. And then once we hit 13, I think a child should be able to start to increase the degree of their training within a specific sport. That's what I think would be desirable.
Dr. Winters, thank you so much. That's really insightful stuff. As a parent, we always have those conversations in our house. What is appropriate and what isn't, and when is it appropriate and what age. So thank you so much. I know the folks out there are going to get a lot from that.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.